delighted to be in your midst. Read about your church in a Religion News Service article about churches that had made the journey that your community has made. And I was so impressed, and I was coming here anyway to do book talks, and I go, well, let's check these guys out. So I'm here to check you out. And I've been taking pictures because I'm a pastor, and I'm going to steal a bunch of ideas from you. So you guys rock. Let me begin with a story. For many years, I was the founder and then the director of the Homeless Services Agency or organization in Palo Alto, California. You would think, the richest town in America would not have such a problem, but in fact, we did. We were right next door to a community that, East Palo Alto, that had a very high level of poverty. And it was not a safe place in East Palo Alto. It had the highest murder rate in the country at one point, next door to Palo Alto. So people living on the streets of East Palo Alto, they were afraid, so they came to Palo Alto to camp out. And that's why we had our drop-in center for them in Palo Alto. One day at the drop-in center, we had a couple of our regulars were there, many regulars, but two in particular. One was a Vietnam vet who had suffered all sorts of PTSD and had alcoholism, and he was kind of a mess, but he was also a very charming guy, very friendly and chatty, but very deeply troubled and very deep into alcoholism. And he was there enjoying our leftover coffee. We had really good leftover food in Palo Alto. Really good. We had, Suzanne's muffins. I can still taste them. Even a day or two old, they were fabulous. So anyway, he was enjoying our breakfast, and a young woman came, and she was there on a mission. She was straight for our phone so she could call her agency to see if she could get a day job, a temp job for the day. She wasn't chatty. She came in just to use our phone and get out to work. But she was suffering from alcoholism as well. She was having a tough time. Suddenly, the Vietnam vet started twitching and heaving and fell onto the asphalt with an alcoholic seizure. And our drop-in center was outdoors because nobody would rent to us. Because, Palo Alto, we love what you're doing, but don't do it here. NIMBY. Yeah, so he fell onto the asphalt. The woman dropped the phone, rushed over, pulled out her hanky, jammed it into his mouth so he wouldn't hurt his tongue with his seizure, and lay there, makes me weep, sorry, still years later, and just held his head in her lap on the asphalt and rubbed his matted hair and said soothing words to him as we waited for 911 to come. That morning I saw God. I saw God. I didn't need to believe in God. I saw God. Because God is love, says the first letter of John at the end of the New Testament, the end of the Bible. God is love. And she was doing God. She was being God. She was expressing God, the God who is love. These days, progressive Christianity is having a moment. Yeah, there are a lot of folks talking about progressive Christianity, particularly religious conservatives who are railing against progressive Christianity and blaming it for the decline of evangelical Christianity in America. It's the best publicity we've ever had. Franklin Graham saying that we have been sent by Satan to lead Christians astray. Fabulous advertising. And it's in the news. And then you have 100 progressive clergy in Minneapolis being arrested, hauled off to jail for protesting the depredations of ICE in that community and everywhere else. That made the news. We have a progressive Christian seminarian running for Senate in Texas. He's awesome. So we're having a moment. But then that leads to people asking this question, which is, what is progressive Christianity? Which is why I wrote this book. To answer that question, there's a lot said about it, but when it comes to actually kind of breaking down what is this thing? It was time for kind of a comprehensive, but short, as you'll see, it's not a big fat book, answer to that question. And so that's what I want to give you an overview about today. What is progressive Christianity? Again, it begins and ends, the Alpha and the Omega, everything that matters in progressive Christianity boils down to the first letter of John, chapter 4, God is love, period. Now, is God something beyond love? Is God more than love? That's an interesting question. And you'd have to bring me back here about 10 times to thoroughly answer that question, at least from my limited perspective. But, for progressive Christians, I would just say generally, what matters is that God is love. And if God is anything else, that's very interesting. We can pursue that. We can check that out. But none of that matters nearly as much as understanding God as love and worshiping God as love. When I stood there at the drop-in center watching that woman tend to that struggling, suffering man, I was worshiping love. That was worship. That's what you do when you come here and you steep yourself in love for each other, and love for love itself. We talk about God in Christianity in a poetic way, right? God, the word God is basically poetry for the experience of love, which we experience personally because love is personal. And so we talk about God as a person because that's the nature of love. It's personal. And we worship it. We honor it. We bow before it. And so the language of God in Christianity all goes back to this experience that we have of the nature of love. What is love? Now that's we could spend a lot of time on that. But, Simone Weil, 20th century French philosopher and theologian, she said, love is attention. Love is attention. We had this wonderful thank you for that beautiful meditation this morning. At USC, when I was the Senior Associate Dean of Religious Life there, my boss and I started a mindfulness program, mindful.usc.edu. At one point, we had 4,000 students and staff taking our classes every year, our free courses. And I was one of the teachers, and I kept that up for about 10 years in my job. And in teaching mindfulness, you get to a point when you're practicing mindfulness. I bet a bunch of people here have experienced this, and it was referenced very much in the meditation this morning. At a certain point, you go, oh, I'm being mindful of my body, my thoughts, my emotions, the narratives running through my mind all the time. I'm aware of all this. I'm paying attention to all of this. And then my students and staff in the course, they get to a point where they go, wait a minute. Who or what is doing the mindfulness? Who is paying attention? And it was scary for people sometimes. I'm like, whoa. It's like the train's going down the track, but there's no engineer. There's no, who's running this train? It was like a jarring moment of awakening. And when they would report this to me, I would say to them, go, well, talk to me after the class about this, because you've now stepped into the realm of religion. Yeah? The religions of the world have something to say about this experience, right? And Christianity, the one who is paying attention is the Christ, St. Paul. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me, right? Your ego, your personality, your body is decentered. And the center is now this consciousness, which in Christianity is a Christ consciousness. Not the ego, it's not St. Paul anymore who's living, it's the Christ. It's the divine within, the divine knower and seer. So for progressive Christians generally, I would say, and I should preface and say, when I talk about progressive Christianity, since there is no dogma to it, what I have to say is just what I have to say about it, right? There's, lots of room. It's a big tent, progressive Christianity, for many, many different points of view. But I would say generally in progressive Christianity, we understand that prayer is not so much asking a supernatural divinity for favors or to break the rules of nature. Rather, progressive Christianity looks at prayer as contemplation, contemplatio, yes? And that's a tradition that goes all the way back to the desert fathers and mothers of the early church, right? The contemplatives, the monastics, who would go out to places like Tucson and hide out in the rocks and the caves and practice contemplation, practice what we would now call mindfulness, until they became aware that the center of their being was the divine. That's prayer in ancient Christian tradition. That's prayer. And I would say progressive Christians today are reclaiming that rich heritage of contemplative prayer. What is the Bible for progressive Christians? Well, the Bible consists of 66 books by different authors over a period of thousands of years, none of whom had any idea that their writings would ever wind up in what we now call the Bible. So when you hear somebody say, the Bible says, well, no, the Bible doesn't say anything. You will find in the Bible all sorts of things, but the Bible as a whole is it's a library. And it is not a rule book of how to live. It's not telling us what we should be doing or what we should be believing. The Bible is something more like a dictionary. Is there anybody here who obeys the dictionary? I don't see any hands, okay? And is there anybody here who thinks that English is the only true language? Okay. I would say progressive Christianity understands the Bible as a language, not normative for the world. It is, and for the mystics of the church all the way back, the interpreters of Christianity all the way through the medieval era into the modern era, they looked at the Bible as a divine source of imagery and stories to be used creatively to express our spiritual experience. Jesus read the Hebrew scriptures that way. He did mashups. He'd take a passage from here, passage from here, mash it up, and come up with something that had nothing to do with the original intent of the writers. That's how he related to the Bible. That's how most Christians throughout history have related to the Bible. It's only fundamentalism, this idea of taking the Bible literally, is a modern idea. We have to remember that. So progressive Christians are actually returning to the roots of the church of the early days and into the medieval era of understanding the Bible as an inexhaustible source of imagery. It's this rich language to express our faith creatively. What is the church? Well, I would say that for progressive Christians, and I write about this in the book, progressive Christians see the church basically as a fitness center for love. Yeah? And sometimes it's heavy lifting, eh? I always say if you belong to a spiritual community where there's nobody in it that is a pain in the ass, then you need to go find a different one because you're not getting the workout, okay? You're not pumping it. Yeah? So that's what the church is. It's a bunch of people that get together to get a workout in practicing love for each other and for their communities. And again, very often it's a heavy lift. And that's good. That's good for us. Build up the muscles, the spiritual muscles, so that we can go out into the world and back to our families and do it. Practice this love that we experience here and that we lift up and talk about here. That's the church. That's spiritual community. Christianity, we follow the way of a guy named Jesus. And who was he? Yeshua, Jesus. Yeshua in Hebrew. Well, the Jesus that we talk about now and that progressive Christians follow is a mashup figure of myth and history. We can be pretty sure that the actual historical figure of Jesus was an extraordinarily compassionate guy. Yeah? A person of deep spirituality and deep caring for others. That is something I think that's historically reliable to claim. But of course, after his crucifixion by the Romans, after his death, his story, the Gospels, started to congeal, and mythology was formed around this figure. And so the figure that we have in the Gospels, the sacred myth of the Gospels, that figure is a blend of history and of myth. And again, we have this idea in our head, myth, that's bad, right? Well, no, myth is good. Good myths are good. Now, there are all sorts of myths that are problematic that we talk about, but the sacred myth of the New Testament, of the Gospels, is a myth that changes lives. The story of Jesus is a story that's a scaffold. It's like a structure on which we assemble our lives, reassemble our lives, and create gospel stories for ourselves. The story of Jesus is a template that we use to look at our own lives in a new way and see hope and redemption and forgiveness instead of despair and hopelessness. That's the power of this story, and the mythology of it is part of its power, all right? Think of the story of Jesus walking on water, right? Great story. Now, there are a lot of Christians in this country who think, well, that's proof that he was supernatural, that he was God, that he was the almighty God, that he was able to walk on water. That's one way of looking at it, if you are thinking of Jesus in that way, as a superman, a supernatural being. But another way is to think of that story as an invitation for you to interpret it as if it was a dream. I invite you just to close your eyes for a moment here and imagine that you are on that boat with the disciples, and Jesus is in the boat with you and the rest of the disciples. And a storm is brewing, and the wind is blowing, and the waves are crashing. And then Jesus steps out onto the water. and the storm is stilled. Okay, now you can open your eyes. You can wake up from this dream that you just had. What does this dream mean for you now? What does it bring up for you now? Each of you can ponder that. For me, as if it was my dream, it would suggest that there is a way to gain mastery over the sea of my unconscious, all the stuff bubbling up and bubbling and churning inside of me that could be very problematic, could be very life destructive. That there's a way to master it, to walk over it instead of being sucked down into it, right? To see what is down there, to know what is down there, and not be consumed by it, not be drowned by it. That's what it would mean for me. And that's what the figure of Jesus would mean for me in that story. The Bible does not invite us to read it as a rule book, like you gotta, do life X, Y, and Z way. So much of it is grounded in historical circumstances that no longer apply to us. Yes? The Bible is not, it just not to be read that way. It doesn't make sense to read it that way. But it does make sense to read it as an invitation for our participation in these stories, as a scaffold for us to assemble our stories, as a language to express our experience. And the figure of Jesus is central to that, this myth man. But the power of that myth, of his story, is tremendous still for us today. God is love. Love is attention. And attention is awe. I have two marvelous little grandsons, Jake and Asher. Jake, yay Jake, who's 6 years old. Asher's 5. And a year ago on his 4th birthday, we were all in the family, we were all in Santa Barbara. And there was this moment where Asher went over to the window in this restaurant, and he's looking out over the beach and the palm trees and the ocean. And he just stood there for a long time and didn't move. And his mouth was like that. And I stood back there. This makes me weep too, just watching my grandson be enraptured by this sight, to be in a state of awe. It was just beautiful. I'll never forget it, ever, ever, ever. The awe in his eye and in his visage. Interesting, isn't it, that the great religious teachers of the world all had awe in their names? Yeah, something for us to pay attention to. Jesus, Yeshua. Yeah. Yahweh, Yahweh God. Buddha, Allah, Rama, Krishna, Aldea.